And I can still see her standing on the corner, waving goodbye. And that's the last time I saw her.
I have gone over the little bit that is known of the things that happened on March 22nd of 1998. Now I'm going to start piecing together what is known about Stacey being reported missing and the investigation that started in Columbus.
As soon as I got home from work, I listened to a message on my voicemail that Stacey's AEP had called and said she hadn't showed up for work for a couple of days. So as soon as I got that call, I called my parents and then I zoom over to her apartment just as quickly as I can.
He initially said he heard loud crashing and banging noises and horrifying screams.
Now on, Just in Case You Forgot.
Just in Case You Forgot podcast is produced and hosted by William Swafford. Music was put together by William Swafford.
March 22nd of 1998. I have said that date a few times in the first 2 episodes of this podcast. The day Stacey Colbert went missing. There is another day that is important to bring up. That is March 24th of 1998, a Tuesday. The reason why this day is important is because it is the day Stacey was reported missing by a call to the police by Danielle, Stacey's sister. You might ask yourself, if Stacey was reported missing on March 24th, a Tuesday, how does one know that Stacey had been missing since March 22nd, which was a Sunday? Well, that's what I'm going to go over in this episode. Before I asked Danielle about March 24th, we were talking about something else, and then kind of went into the day that she called the police to report her sister missing. I had asked Danielle if Stacey had been dating anyone around the time that she had gone missing.
Yep. So she moved apartment. She was living by herself in Westerville, and she had just moved a couple of months back from a place there to Governor Square, and she was dating this really nice guy. And he was actually, at the time that it happened, it was over spring break, and he was actually with his buddies in, I forgot, it's a spring break location. It's, what is the name of it? What was the name? It's off of Texas. It's not Corpus Christi. It's San Padre Island. That's where he and his buddies went. And interesting story that when he came back, because he had been gone that whole week, and when he came back to a flyer. He thought, and his buddy showed him the flyer, and he thought it was some sick joke. He came racing over to my apartment, and he's like, "What is going on?" He was in tears. It was awful. Yeah. And so he nice, really, really nice guy. We stayed in contact for a little bit.
This makes me wonder if this could have been an act of jealousy. Could there have been someone who could have feelings for Stacey, knew Stacey was dating someone else, maybe knew the other guy was out of town, and decided to take a chance and go see Stacey? Now, right before Danielle starts talking about how she found out that her sister had gone missing, she begins to mention someone else.
So when she moved, she did have some male friends who helped her move from that Westerville apartment to the Governor Square. She had this one friend. So I didn't really know him very well. That was when I met him, because I, of course, with moving, I was helping too. Yeah. Whatever she did, I was helping, Interesting interaction with him. When that first day when I got the call. So I guess let me go to the day.
Take a mental note of that. We'll talk more about that person in the next episode. Now, Danielle talks about what led up to her going over to Stacey's apartment on March 24th.
So I was working. I worked at Nationwide. They used to have group health insurance, and it was right in the Tuttle crossing area. And I I hadn't heard from her. So usually when the award ceremony happens, and Titanic was up for all these awards, she and I and Mom would like call each other if it's like a movie we'd seen together and talk about it and like, oh my gosh, they got it, yay! And this was before you're really texting. I mean you're texting, but this is when you're typing 20 times for one letter.
Yeah.
So we were more talky at that point, and had left several messages, and Stacey had talked about potentially going to overseas. She was doing some logistic plans. She had worked for AEP. She had just got a job 6 months prior with them, and she had talked about potentially traveling. So I thought maybe she was traveling, and that's why we didn't hear back from her. Well, and that was over the weekend, I think on Sunday. And then on Tuesday, as soon as I got home from work, I listened to a message on my voicemail that Stacey's AEP had called and said she hadn't showed up for work for a couple of days. So as soon as I got that call, I call my parents, and then I like zoom over to her apartment just as quickly as I can. And because that's not her. Like, she is a very dedicated, like even in high school, like she had work study, her tennis. Like, she was incredibly a hard worker, dedicated. Like, she's not someone who wouldn't show up without a darn good reason. So I ran over there, and so I got the call, ran over to her apartment. Her car was still there. The door was open. I mean, it was definitely not fully closed. And there was still like snow on the ground a little bit. And I go into her place. I mean, it's obviously that like all of her stuff is there. Doors are open, like things are open. Refrigerator was open. There was pizza on the counter, and I knew something happened. Like her wallet, like all of her stuff was there.
Yeah.
Contacts, things like that, like purse, like personal effects, so I knew like something, like I just knew it was bad. And so, I mean, I first called my dad and Mom. I'm like, something horrible happened, I'm calling the police. And then I called the police. So, and then that night was just, probably a blank some of it out, not on purpose, but it was really tough.
Stacey not reporting to work, her car and things at the apartment, and the door slightly open are signs of something not being right. I cannot imagine what could have been running through Danielle's mind at this time.
The first level of police officers come in, they're looking through, they want me to, is this typical? Could she have run away? All those questions. I was really scared because so my degree is in criminology. And so I knew if I touched stuff, like I was afraid I was contaminating a scene, and they want me to go through her stuff. I'm like, I don't have gloves on.
Yeah.
Should I be touching these things? I mean,
yeah.
And this is back in '98. We just started doing DNA stuff. I mean, Watson and Crick just, had Hugo done in '96. It was only 2 years before. So we were just starting to get into this space of evidence and things like that. So like within a couple hours, then I started talking to different detectives. I talked to like homicide and the rape unit, and
the first ones to start investigating was the Columbus Police Division Sexual Abuse Squad, which back in 1998 investigated missing person cases. However, homicide detectives were called in when law enforcement became concerned for Stacey's safety.
I talked for a long time, probably till midnight. My uncle, who he's no longer with us, he lives in the Dublin area. He and his son came to help support me to try to figure out what was going on. So he is a, oral surgeon. He had some friends. I mean, his son, Scott, works in the fire department. So had some people who, knew that they needed to get involved. Like they were willing to get involved right away to ask the questions and things like that. So with her being just turning 23, it was hard because, you had to wait 24 hours
Yeah.
and all of those things.
The news of Stacey being missing would soon make it to her sorority sisters. This is Katie. We first heard from her in episode 2.
So I was on vacation in Texas. I had my first nephew had just been born in Dallas, and like I mentioned, I just got married, and so my new husband and I were traveling down there. We were stopping in Dallas to see the baby, and then we were going with another couple to South Padre Island. So I was in South Padre Island, and it would have been, for me, very early on that Wednesday morning, March 25th, 1998. I got a pretty panicked call from Danielle in my hotel room. And it must have honestly been pretty difficult for her to track me down. I think Danielle had to go through my parents and find out what hotel I was at and call it, because I didn't have a cell phone. My husband did at that time. So Danielle called me and she said Stacey had been discovered missing the previous day when she didn't show up at work. And like I mentioned, Danielle was concerned at that time maybe that Stacey had been kidnapped while she was running. That was before we knew that likely it had happened overnight, actually. So Danielle asked me if I could think of anywhere Stacey could have gone or anyone that might be involved. And it all felt really unreal to me, especially being so far away from home at the time. So being in South Padre Island, it was like more than a 2-day drive back to Ohio. And then at some point during the drive, it was either Danielle or the police. I can't remember which one called my husband's cell phone and asked me to call one of the police detectives from a landline. So I remember stopping at a mall near Memphis and using the payphone inside, which is really a weird conversation, especially in a mall. But that detective asked me if I could think of anyone that might want to hurt Stacey or could be involved in her disappearance, which is unsettling to kind of mentally scan through her friends and acquaintances and try to think of anyone that had been a little bit suspicious. Stacey had never really told me of anyone that hurt her or raised a major red flag, but she had mentioned 2 separate men over the years that either had kind of erratic behavior or seemed like easily angered or had a drinking problem. So that was the best that I could come up with. And then I know the police later eliminated one of them from consideration.
This is how Alicia found out about Stacey.
That piece I can remember. I was in my apartment and I got a call from the police asking, did I know where Stacey was? And I couldn't believe what I was hearing and who I was hearing it from. I just remember sitting there in my living room of my apartment and just being like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And then, I don't know why, you call her then, and then you call her voicemail, and you're just like, oh my gosh, what's going on, and everything like that. And then everything after that moment just became surreal.
This is Paula.
So it was March 25th, 1998, and I was celebrating my 24th birthday, and my birthday is March 24th. And my parents were over, and we were eating chili, and the phone rang, and it was my friend Alicia, one of Stacey's old roommates, asking me if I had seen or heard from Stacey. And I hadn't, because I was being a crappy friend. And I did remember, though, that Ashley had told me the last time she had been in town. At the time, Ashley was living in Washington, D.C., but she came back to visit all the time because she's from Worthington, a suburb of Columbus, the same as me. We went to high school together. And Ashley had told me that Stacey was planning on going out there to D.C. And so when Alicia called me and asked if I had seen Stacey, Alicia was very distraught. She was very upset. I was distracted, and I'm not really one to panic easily. And so I'm thinking this is all just some kind of misunderstanding. And so I told Alicia, you know what? She was thinking of going to visit Ashley. This is spring break. It was spring break for all the colleges. I was like, maybe she just went out to visit Ashley, because at this time I didn't know she hadn't shown up for work. There were other details that I didn't know because, Alicia was just trying to find out if anyone had heard from Stacey. And so I told her, just call Ashley. And so she said that she would. And about an hour later, I got a call from Detective Morris or Phillips. There was a husband and wife, and I don't remember. They used different last names, but the man called me and interviewed me. And that was when I knew something was very, very wrong.
What kind of questions did he ask you?
He just asked me if I had seen Stacey. He asked about her personality. Really in-depth questions if she was promiscuous, which she was not. She was not that kind of girl. I mean, she liked flirting with boys. She was very flirtatious, but she was not promiscuous. She was looking for a husband. She dreamed of being married. And she was not the kind of girl to sleep around. And so I told them, no, she wasn't that kind of girl. I did tell them that she was very trusting and a little bit naive. But other than that, she did not live a high-risk life. Stacey was really goal-oriented. She was very focused on what she wanted out of her life and the things that she needed to do to get what she wanted in her life. And so she wasn't a big, heavy drinker. I mean, sometimes she was a bit of a weekend warrior, but not every weekend and not drinking all the time. She didn't do any kind of drugs. Like I said, she wasn't promiscuous. Stacey led her life the right way. And I knew something was really wrong when I spoke with the detective, but I still kept thinking this has to be a misunderstanding because Stacey's just not the kind of girl that something like this happens to.
A missing person investigation would start, so this is what is known up to this point. Stacey was preparing to go on a business trip. Stacey had not been in contact with anyone for 2 days, March 22nd through March 24th. Stacey had not shown up for work, which led to her employer, AEP, to contact Danielle to check on Stacey. Stacey's car was outside of her apartment. The door was unlocked and not fully shut. Her keys, purse, and credit cards were in the apartment. I read somewhere that $40 in cash was there too. Food had been delivered from a pizza place and it was still on the counter. The refrigerator door was open. There was no signs of anything being stolen. As I said, this started off as a missing person investigation. However, after 3 days, it got turned into a homicide investigation. Some people at that time did not know about that.
I don't think that any of us really realized exactly what was going on in those early days, at least from my end. We weren't being told anything other than what we were doing was being helpful. So, that it went to the homicide, I think was just something that we didn't know at that time. And you gotta remember, there's no internet. We're not doing searches. We didn't really see that it moved to a homicide until I think there was an article 6 months later.
Really?
Yeah. And at least I didn't know. I thought we were going to find her. I really did. Yeah. And I just didn't think she was dead at that point.
I asked Danielle if she knew why the investigation was going to be treated like a homicide investigation before even locating Stacey.
It started off as they come in as a missing person, but within a couple of days it got turned into a homicide investigation.
Yeah.
Can you comment on what kind of foul play that they found there at the apartment that turned it into a homicide investigation?
I guess I can't really officially comment. I mean, I don't know. None of that was communicated to me. But I think part of it's standard operating procedures. I mean, there was no body found.
Yes.
But, there was some blood found on the scene, so that may have contributed to it.
Detectives would start interviewing everyone who knew Stacey and anyone who had contact with her. One person who was interviewed was a pizza delivery person. This person would be important to talk to because it is the last known person to see Stacey. The delivery driver made a delivery to Stacey's apartment at the Governor Square complex on Saturday, March 21st, around 6 in the evening. The delivery driver stated that he felt very strongly that Stacey was not alone in the apartment. The driver told police that they sensed someone else was in the apartment with Stacey. So was there someone else in the apartment with Stacey on March 21st around 6 in the evening? If so, who was it? I asked Danielle how she felt about what the delivery driver had told the police.
There was a pizza delivery guy that was interviewed.
Yeah.
And when he was interviewed, he said that he had a feeling that she wasn't alone. Do you have any idea who could have possibly been there?
Don't. I really, really don't. I mean, I know that before the pizza got there that she was on the phone to my dad. Like, they were having their weekly talk. Like, yes. My dad and her had talked every week. But I'm not really aware of any person who is there. It was definitely not me on that Friday night.
Yeah.
So I really don't know, actually. Because I know that my dad and her talked that night, so I don't know if someone, but I mean, it was a big pizza, so I don't know. The pizza was still out when I got back, when I went to her apartment that Tuesday.
Was there someone in Stacey's apartment on March 21st when the delivery driver was there? I wish there was an answer for that. Detectives would question people in Stacey's apartment building, and they got a statement from a man in apartment C, which is the apartment right above Stacey's. I know the man's name, but I'm not going to say it. He passed away back in 2021, so there's no way that I can talk to him. This case is 25 years old. People's memories fade, and people pass away. This man was living on the second floor in the apartment right above Stacey's with a woman. This man's statement to law enforcement would get everyone's attention. The man stated that around 4 in the morning on March 22nd, they were woken up by a female screaming and loud banging. It continued on for a little bit, and they could not go back to sleep. They did not call the police to do a welfare check on Stacey. What the man did say that he did do was go down to Stacey's apartment door around 2 in the afternoon on March 22nd. He seen that Stacey's door was not completely shut. He seen Stacey's cat outside. He knocked on the door and there was no response from inside of the apartment. The man never called the police to do a welfare check on Stacey. Now, before you put too much thought into this man's statement to police, you need to know that the man tried to change his statement a few days later. The man from apartment C would now say that he did not hear screams. What he heard was sounds of a sexual nature. A person almost had to put their ear to the floor to hear. This does not sit right with me. A person does not go and check on their neighbor over hearing what they thought were sounds of a sexual nature. Whatever that man heard the morning of March 22nd of 1998 was bad enough to where he stood at Stacey's door at 2 in the afternoon to check on her. I asked Danielle what she thought about this man's statements to law enforcement.
Because I seen that there was a neighbor that said that there was loud screaming and some loud banging, and they couldn't go back to sleep. But the neighbor never went down there to check on her until like the next day.
Yeah, and he kind of went back and forth too. He didn't want to get involved because he had some outstanding parking tickets, and he was afraid to get involved. So, which is just makes me sick. But
well, I also seen that sometime later that he changed his story.
Yep.
To where he said that he heard like sexual noises or whatever, and that they were so low that you basically had to put your ear to the floor. To me, that kind of throws up a red flag. Why are you changing the story? Why would you first say that you heard loud screaming when you really heard somebody having sex? That, to me, don't make sense.
Exactly, and that was a red flag for the police, too.
So.
Exactly. So that was definitely someone that they really investigated, for sure.
Here's what Katie had to say about the neighbor's statements.
I was angry for a long time at the neighbor just because I felt like that was her only chance, maybe, that if somebody called the police right then, either they could stop the crime or they could immediately respond and maybe catch the person that did it, at least. I would say over the years, I've mostly let go of my anger. I think he was probably scared and found the situation surreal. And I wonder if the changing explanation was more maybe him trying to make himself feel better, or having taken some criticism from other people, like, why didn't you call? Maybe just in his memory it started to shift from, well, it didn't sound like violence, it sounded like just sex. So that I guess that's what I hope, versus just him being kind of callous. But my guess is that I've always heard that when people witness a crime, if they think other people will respond, then they don't feel the ownership themselves to respond. And so maybe he felt like, in this apartment building, surely other people here, maybe the next door neighbor or something, and somebody will call, and nobody did. It still hurts me just to think that nobody called, and that even the next day, when I think her cat was loose or something looked not right with the apartment, that still nobody called. But she hadn't lived there that long, and maybe just people coming and going in an apartment, they just didn't feel that kind of responsibility to their neighbors. There's a lesson to be learned. Like, maybe any of us were someone's last hope, and we can't just assume that somebody else will take care of it. I get the value of like minding your own business in general in life, but I feel like in certain situations it's not the best path. And it's definitely frustrating just to think she's screaming, hoping somebody's gonna help or get help, and nobody does.
I asked Paula what she thought about the neighbor.
Oh, I think it's bullshit, and it pisses me off. Pardon my French, but
Which version do you believe? Let me ask you.
The first version has to be true because it makes sense. His second version doesn't make sense. So his first version is he and his wife, and it's important to remember it was a couple. I don't know why the media has always focused on the man, but it was a man and a woman. There were two of them. They heard horrifying screams that were so awful they couldn't get back to sleep at like 4 a.m. He doesn't call the police because he's got a bunch of parking tickets he doesn't want to be held accountable for. That's why he didn't call the police, which to this day I don't think he's ever had to pay, and he was never arrested for them. But anyhow, he doesn't call. He goes downstairs to check on her 2:00 in the afternoon the next day. Her door is partially open. He sort of calls her name. He sees her kitten roaming around outside of her apartment, calls out to her. She doesn't respond. He still doesn't call the police. He goes back upstairs. He tells the police this, but then his conscience gets the best of him. And I think the next day or 2 days later, when they interview him again, he comes up with a whole different story. He says he and his wife thought that Stacey had company down there. The noises were more of a sexual nature. They had to put their ear to the floor to hear. Who does that? Who listens on the floor to hear their neighbor having sex? And why do you go downstairs the next day at 2:00 in the afternoon? Was he looking for a play-by-play? That doesn't make sense. I don't know why. I mean, I think his conscience got the better, or their conscience, both of them, got the better of them. And they came up with a news story. And I think that they have convinced themselves of that second story. I think that's how they live with themselves for not calling. But it doesn't make sense. And then on top of that, Detective has said Stacey did not have sex anywhere in that apartment. And she had lived there for 6 months. I mean, they looked at all the fluids, everything that was in that apartment. I don't think she was raped. But he said she did not have sex in that apartment. So he didn't, there's no way he could have heard sexual noises anyway. But the fact that he never changes the part of his story where he went downstairs to check on her at 2 a.m. or 2 p.m, that doesn't make sense. You don't check on your neighbor who was having sex the night before. No. Especially not if you're a man. You don't do that. I don't know. I never met him, as some of the other girls did. when they were there at the apartment one time setting up for one of the vigils. I was late coming from work, so I never met him. And no one, I don't think, ever met the wife or the girlfriend, whoever the woman was. I believe they're still together, but I don't know that for sure.
All of Stacey's bedding was collected as evidence by law enforcement. I tried to contact the lady who lived in apartment C with the man who gave that statement, but I got no response. I cannot talk to that man because he passed away. However, Ashley did talk to the man back in 1998.
I talked to him back then.
How did that conversation go? Let me say this first. I was talking about it, and the thing that gets me is that he either did not know Stacey and he heard something horrible to where he had to check on her the next day, or he knew her. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if he did not know her, then he heard something bad where he had to check on her.
Yeah, that's what's so frustrating about it is, you can, like, he initially said he heard loud crashing and banging noises and horrifying screams. And, a couple of days later, my friend and I are over there, and we're putting up flyers because we thought that it was somebody, close to the neighborhood, like, I don't know. And that was just kind of always my focus and always what kind of drove us back there. And he came out and was talking to us, like, as we're putting up flyers. And it's like, well, when I first heard, I thought it was that, but now it sounds like it was more of a sexual nature. And I wanted to throttle him. I mean, had he just called the police that night, at least possibly someone could be off the streets. You don't kill somebody and then not hurt other people. Like, you just don't. Like, there's definitely other victims out there, for sure.
My question is how many neighbors go knock on their neighbor's door after hearing them have sex?
Well, and see the cat out. The cat was brand new. She hadn't even named it yet.
So, I mean,
like that boots thing was like her and I joking around. The fact that it made it into the news, I love it. She hated that name for the cat. But we ended up naming the kitten after she passed. And our friend kept him forever. And it was Cookie.
There were a lot of questions that needed to be answered at the beginning of this investigation. Law enforcement was trying to keep a lot of details about the investigation to themselves. However, there was a leak of information to the media. A piece of blood-stained carpet was taken out of Stacey's apartment. It was not said who the blood had come from. 3 detectives would start working on this investigation. The news of Stacey being missing would make it to the campus of Ohio State and around the city of Columbus. Stacey's family and friends waited for answers. Here is what is still to come on Just in Case You Forgot. I will talk more about the efforts to find Stacey, and then I will talk about the day Stacey was found in a different county in Ohio.
Just tens of thousands of flyers every day and delivering them to the sorority house. The sorority house kind of became like our central place to meet.
My mom had called me and said that they had found her. And then it was her. And it was, I, thought honestly, when we were doing the missing campaign, that we would find her alive. Like, I really, really did. And that's something, to hear that, to hear the finality of it, and to hear where she was found and how she was found, and like, it was crushing.
Please remember there is still an investigation going on into Stacey's death. If you have any information that could be helpful to this investigation, please contact the Delaware County Sheriff's Department in Ohio.
Just in Case You Forgot podcast is produced and hosted by William Swafford. Music was put together by William Swafford.